course, as I was saying, one of the many things that came into it was actually having decided what directors do, what does it actually directors do not do? And this quite surprised Mace. He found that under no circumstances do directors establish objectives, strategies, and policies. They often felt they were not qualified to do so, especially in very complex markets such as multinationals. So they felt that actually the objectives should be set by established managers who had the capital funds to allocate. And this included major decisions that affected the company, like mergers and things like that. There was often little evidence provided for decisions, and often the board was very, very perfunctory and automatic and routine in granting permissions. And one of the other things that they didn't do is they didn't really ask any discerning questions. Board meetings were not considered as forums for discussion. Board members often felt overwhelmed. They were worried about looking like idiots. In fact, a quote from one of them was he would try to avoid looking like an idiot whenever the board meeting came up. Presidents who didn't get approval were known to bully board members, push them around. Garden variety outside directors selected by the president from the peer group tended not to be interested in asking questions. Sometimes, though, there would be occasional outsiders who did ask questions. The other sort of director might question was obviously those directors who directly represented the owners of the firm. So if there was somebody who actually represented shareholders, they would do that. It was also at this point that they started to realise the importance of board diversity, that having too many people, that Chandler had argued, all these idea guys, same backgrounds, same schools, same universities, same attitudes, were people working well together. But then it came actually out saying, actually, what about asking discerning questions? What about the idea of having board diversity? If people are too similar, they tend to think the same, and this in itself caused a problem. The situation is known as groupthink, if you want to look it up. There's quite a lot of very interesting information out there. It's also noted that although directors of ownership often did ask discerning questions, stockholders themselves had little impact on who is on the board. Presidents obviously made the decisions, and the only time when actually you got people on the board, larger than people, is when you actually had a very large stockholder who could bully his way onto the board. Of course, the rules of stock exchanges tend to say that large stockholders should have a membership in the board, but they should not be a powerful membership. They should not be chair of the board, for instance, or things like that. It's often noted that boards did not select the president. This surprised Mace. He thought that they would actually have a role in selecting the president. Said that it did happen occasionally, and this was but only in a crisis, and when in fact, as we've seen before, boards were often in chaos and made very bad decisions. There was often a committee for selecting the president, and this was actually controlled and often run by the president, who was maintaining control. He would decide who's on the committee, and in many cases, the president actually often himself handpicked his successor. Often this was based on the idea, and inside he was saying actually to the board of directors, oh, well, you don't really work with the people. I work with these people during the day. I know Jim is much better at doing it than Janet. Therefore, I think Jim should become president. Of course, the reality might be that Janet was more critical, was most likely to go along with what Jim liked. And so, therefore, that's why Jim would be appointed in that. So it's really the boards would then tend to base approval based on limited evidence, effectively quite often overwhelmed by a presentation that would simply say, Jim is the better character, Janet is not really the ideal, therefore we go with Jim. And boards would very, very rarely reject this sort of idea of a presidential candidate, even when it quite clearly was someone who had been pushed forward by the existing president, someone who suggested there's going to be a continuation or may well be a backstreet driver in control. What was the formal powers of control? In small companies, owners often did act as managers. They appointed outside directors to provide inputs such as expertise and advice and counsel. Quite often the decision of who was in control would be on the heirs of the original people to set it up. And the family owners often largely determined what the board did and how the board behaved. But in larger companies where the president and the members of the board etc. themselves owned little stock in the company, the control is de jure dispersed, i.e. legally dispersed. The idea is that people from very different aspects of the company, different parts of the small group of people who own the shares, should actually have a say in it. But a side effect of this absence of a large stockholder was that the president themselves would have major control. And in fact, in some ways, some of these big companies ended up looking very like family companies in the form of the control, in the form of the way that power within them was designed. In mixed systems where you might actually have a system where it was it was a public limited company, but there was limited president control because there were the existence of large stockholders. Some directors who represent large owners have been found to be very, very passive, and institutional investors were one of them like that. Now, to a certain extent, this is being broken away from. We have started to get some institutional activists, but they also tend to be shareholder activists in the smallest, narrowest version, i.e., people who are arguing for shareholder value, for the boosting of dividends, etc. Over the idea of some big companies that have been set up by families, quite often you found the first generation were very entrepreneurial, were very active. But over the second generation, the third generation, heirs became diverse. The ownership got split over a number of people. Some of them would be very uninterested in the firm, but in any other being apart from trying to see how much money they would get out of it. It must be said, though, that although many presidents knew they had complete power, there was a general tendency to rule by consensus. That presidents of companies tended to avoid overuse of their own power. They saw directors as counsel, but they also saw directors as counsel that appointed at the discretion and that they served at the pleasure of the president. There were some presidents who were tyrants. Top management changes often without board approval, etc., could be undertaken, and this could be a sort of bad thing. But it's very difficult. If the president was a tyrant to the other managers, then maybe you'd also be a tyrant to the board. It'd be difficult to do that. Quite often, board members continued under tyrannical presidents because they got, although their function was now broadly meaningless, they had good allegiance to it and they had good prestige from holding the positions, and there were a number of financial perks that were very rewarding. So, what are the major problem areas in the selection of appointment of directors, except their ownership issues, but dealing with the fact that a general normal company? Presidents tended to prefer prestigious directors, somebody who had a good name, somebody who could be used for marketing, somebody who they wanted to hang out with. They tend to pick people who were not controversial, who were seen as friendly, who were seen as sympathetic. One thing that presidents did not look for was active board members. Few presidents really wanted anyone who looked like they were going to take a long period and like take a real interest in running the board. So why did people join the boards under these circumstances? It seems strange. Why would you commit yourself to something when it seems very, very unwelcoming, unwarming? Well, the motivation for joining the board was often mixed. They were seen perhaps as an opportunity to learn. So somebody coming through to start at an early age might decide that actually, I think it'd be good to actually get involved in the board to see how a company runs, to gain this sort of mythical big picture strategic approach. There was prestige. A lot of people would think, "Oh, I think being on a board director sounds good. I want to be, I want to get up there. I want to be seen as one of the people who actually is now running this company." Quite often, there were some very spurious reasons for appointing insiders. Some might say, "Oh, this person knows a lot of what's going on," but the real reason might be that they might be trying to pack the board to outmaneuver cynical outsiders by appointing lots of loyal and dependent insiders, people who were, in order to keep their job, they needed to be answerable to the president, and now they were supposed to supervise the president. There's clear conflicts of interest here. Another thing, quite often there might be a banker appointed to the board, someone who actually had financial intervention, somebody who actually had a property. If a lot of money was being lent to the company, then the bank might insist on having one of their own people sit on the board. So there could be one of those reasons to look after the money you've lent. Again, could well be a conflict of interest because the bank would really only be caring about getting paid back, and it could be a sign of a strong client relationship, but it could also be kind of a very incestuous, weak relationship. And there are various other reasons. The others we talked about, as I said before, the area of expertise, trying to bring something to the company that they might always know about. For instance, might know about certain markets or marketing or engineering. It could be for morale reasons. It could be saying, "Oh, we've got somebody who looks good, who the employees like." We'll boost the employees' morale by saying, "Look, if you two work hard, you can end up on the board of directors." It could be a reward for working hard. It could be training for people who are seen as future executives. It could actually be to say to the outside of the board, "We'll bring you so and so onto the board because we want you to have a look at him and tell us what you think, because we're thinking of him as a potential future chief executive of the company." So there were quite a number of reasons why people would still want to join the boards, even though they were actually really only just becoming, as is said, ornaments on the corporate Christmas tree. Family companies, some serious differences here in the way that family companies run. The The problem actually as the companies expanded was quite often that senior older family members who'd grown up in an area in which they were always working for them as the family could find it great difficulty in objectively evaluating those outsiders. Could be positive, they might think, oh, too much of them. It could be negative, they might think, oh, they're not part of us, they're not one of us, they shouldn't be allowed in. Quite often, a family that owned a company fully could use its facilities of providing perks to families. Small aside, an ex-girlfriend of mine worked for a company in Essex, quite a small family company. She'd been struggling, they'd not had a pay rise for a while, there's some sort of criticism. She did an evaluation of how many family members had non-jobs at the company. And there was, considering it was quite a small company, about 200 employees, about 30 family members worked there, most of whom didn't actually do anything worthwhile at all. When companies expand, when they start to get new shareholders on board, there then grows up an inherent conflict. Family interests saying, this company exists to provide employment to our family, but new external stockholders saying, actually, no, it doesn't. This company exists to turn a profit. This company exists to provide employment. This company does various other things, but it's not a personal family piggy bank. This extent of this ownership, family first, can obviously vary a lot across the different companies that looked at. But this sort of dispersion of ownership was shown. There's no guarantee of dispersion of control. If there were a large number of people owning shares, perhaps across a wide variety, maybe they were ex-family members, etc., it did not mean that necessarily there's any greater control being put on to the president by the board of directors.